You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have S.A. Cosby on the show with me today. He has a phenomenal new book. It's called Blacktop Wasteland. And let me tell you what, if you're accumulating your summer reading stack that you're going to go through this year, this book must be in that stack. It's called Blacktop Wasteland. I love this book so much. Welcome to the show, Shawn.
Oh, man. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Shawn, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I think my very first memory is, I think possibly my mom read a book to me. And I didn't like the way it ended. I think I may have been around 7 or 8. And I just complained about the ending. And she said, well, if you hate the ending so much, write your own stories. And I think she was a little perturbed with me that she was trying to give me some childhood entertainment, and I wasn't helping her along there. And so I did. I wrote a story about, it was a reimagining of The Night Before Christmas, and and it ended up getting published along with a bunch of other stories with the kids in my elementary school class in our local paper. And I remember seeing it in the paper and cutting it out, and it was only like 12 sentences, but something about that clicked in me that I maybe wanted to do that. And of course, life goes on and has ups and downs and things happen. And I didn't really get back to being a serious writer until probably in my 20s.
Wow. Do you remember, Shawn, what the first book, or maybe it was a series or maybe an author, that you finished reading a book by them and you realized that this story completely transported you to another time, another place? And what was your first experience with realizing that was possible?
I think my first experience with that was probably Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I had read a lot before that, and my aunt gave me that book. I was like around 9 or 10, and that was my first grown up book to read. Up to that point, I'd read I'm dating myself here, but I had read the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and the Three. I love the Three. I was a big fan of the Three Investigators. I thought they were a lot cooler than the Hardy Boys, and I love that series of books. And some other young adult and kid books that were interesting. But my aunt gave me that book when she was done with it, and it was something about just reading and being immersed in that world. I think also because I had a familiarity with that small town. Salem's Lot was very similar to where I grew up in Virginia in Matthews County. And so I recognized a lot of the characters, even if they weren't, even if there's not a lot of characters in the book that look like me per se. Yeah. But I recognized those character archetypes and tropes, and the small town gossip and the busybody and the town drunk and the person that everybody thinks is fast. Maybe they're not as fast as you think they are. And the interconnectedness and tapestry of small town life. And it was the first time I read a book where I realized the power that the writer has, or a writer has, and how I was obsessed with that book. I read that book in 2 days. I could not put it down. And it was the first time I had that feeling of just total immersion into a world. And so it was, as a reader, I've been chasing that feeling ever since. And I get it on many occasions. But as a writer, I think that was the first time I thought I'd like to do that for someone. I'd like for someone to react like that to something I have written.
I know exactly what you're talking about, Sean, with the way Stephen King writes just normal, everyday people, and I think that's one of the powers that he has, is to just make you feel like you belong there, like you just like it's all the people that you already know, and he gets you comfortable with them. Because it's just like the life that you know, and then he yanks the rug out from under you.
Exactly, exactly.
It's so funny, but also being from the rural South, from Mississippi, South Mississippi, where I'm from, that there's and he's from Maine, which is the opposite ends of the country. But life is kind of the same, there, especially in small town America. And I had the same experience with his books when I was a kid. I guess that's a universal response to Stephen King. I don't know.
I think so. I think he has that talent of creating, not stock characters, but like you said, characters you recognize. And so because you recognize them, you have an innate connection to them almost immediately. And so then when the vampire shows up, or the werewolf, or the ghost children, or, the evil clown, you are invested in what happens to these characters because they remind you of people that you know. And I think that's his genius. I don't know if he does that by design, or if that's just the way his style evolved, but it definitely grabs you and makes you realize, man, I hope these people make it out of this alive. And so that was the first book that gave me that feeling. And then after that, I sought out books. I was a big horror fan, big crime fan. So I sought out books that replicated that experience.
Well, if I ever get Stephen King on this show, Sean, I'll ask him for you and for me, if it's by design or if it just comes out that way.
Please do.
I will. So you had this feeling early on that you wanted to do this thing. You wanted to create these kind of stories, and you had the storytelling gene, if we want to put it that way. How did you pursue that? Like in high school, and then whatever came after school? Did you know that this was going to be a path that you pursued?
It was a very circuitous path to writing for me.
Those are my favorite.
I grew up in a really small town, and my family we lived in poverty. I always tell people that my formative years are a bad country song because our house burned down, my mom and daddy split, and then we had to move in with my grandma. And so my mom.
Did you lose your dog though?
No, we didn't lose the dog.
Okay.
Winky was his name, and Winky came when he survived the house fire. It was a trailer fire, so it went up like a tinderbox. But
right.
And so what happened was my mom was partially disabled when I was a young child, and so we moved in with my grandparents. And so she was trying to work even with this partial disability, and we lived with my grandparents. And so writing and reading were forms of escape for me. And so when I was in high school, my 11th grade English teacher gave us an assignment to write basically a "What did you do last summer?" story. And I didn't do anything last summer because I was poor, so we didn't go on vacations. And so I just made up this fantastical story. And he really liked it. He's like, wow, this is very inventive. And so from then on, for like the next 2 years in high school, he really was like a mentor to me, kind of fanning this flame of me wanting to be a writer. And so I wrote I wrote horrible stories for our high school literary magazine. I think everybody writes horrible stories unless you're like a genius like King or Barker or Walter Mosley. And so what happened was I went to college, a small local college, a commuter college basically, and I went for 2 years, and then unfortunately my mother's disability worsened, and I wasn't able to continue my education there. And so I came out and I got a job. And then a whole bunch of other stuff happened. And so a whole lot of stuff happened between then and now. And so what happened was I actually left the state for a while, trying to find work, doing some things. Had a whole Jack Kerouac moment in my 20s and on the road and stuff. And I ended up back in Virginia in early back and forth. I came back and forth a bunch of times. And in 2003, I got a job with a major hardware retailer, national retail hardware chain. and became a manager there. And in the course of that time, having a little stability in my life, I was able to kind of really, I decided I'm really going to be serious about this. Like, I had written some stories off and on and really hadn't gotten anything published, and kind of went away from writing and came back, and, had rocky relationships and came back and worked very, odd jobs. I was a bouncer for a while, construction worker, and different things. And when I finally got this job and got a little stability in my life in my mid-20s, late 20s, I should say, I was like, okay, I'm going to get really serious about this. And I started taking online courses about writing. I bought a bunch of books about writing. I really educated myself, not just by reading novels, but really educating myself to the craft of writing. And one of my coworkers gave me the best piece of advice for my writing career. He said, here's the thing, man, you got to go to where the publishers are and the editors and the other writers. He said, the days of, Edgar Allan Poe sitting in his small flat, with his quill pen and sending off these epic tomes is over. And so I saved my scratch and my money a little bit and started going to conventions back, in the before times when conventions were actually a thing. And I started going to conventions, and we're just getting serious about writing, like really being serious about it. Taking constructive criticism, which I know is hard for anybody who writes to a hard thing for anybody to do. So anyway, fast forward, a few years after that, I wrote a story. Let me back up. I had a friend that went to New York, and she was a performer, a belly dancer. And after her performance, she went to a bar called Shade, and it's a bar in the Village, in the East Village in New York. And the guy there was the bartender. He got to talking with her, and he published a magazine called Thug Lit, and he was always looking for new writers. And so she came home, and we were having lunch or something, and she said, hey, I met this guy, and he's looking for crime writers. And I said, well, at the time, I was trying to be a horror writer. I really wanted to be the next Stephen King, and It wasn't going very well. And so she said, you should write a story for this guy. He pays pretty good. I'm like, all right. So I said, what the hell? So I wrote this story called The Rat and the Cobra about these two brothers in Virginia, in rural Virginia, fighting over an inheritance. And I sent it off to Thug Lit. And the editor of Thug Lit is a guy named Todd Robinson. Loved that guy. He gave my first paying gig as a writer. And it was something about crime fiction that just clicked with my skill set. And I don't mean that arrogantly. I mean, it's just something about writing crime stories and the way I view writing. Those two things seem to fit. And from then on, I published a few more times in Thug Lit. I published a few more times in different magazines. And eventually, I ended up writing my first novel, My Darkest Prayer, which is a rural noir mystery story. And it got rejected 63 times. I got with an agent, and he was trying to sell it, and it just wasn't working. And so he and I parted ways amicably. And I ended up doing a Noir at the Bar, a live event in D.C., and I ran into a guy named Austin Camacho, who he and his wife Denise run Intrigue Publishing, a small independent publisher in Maryland. And they picked up Darkest Prayer. And so in an effort to promote Darkest Prayer, because anybody that works with an independent publisher knows that, you are working hand in hand with the independent publisher, small press. Right. And so you guys are doing a lot of work together. And so I saved some more money, and I went to BoucherCon in 2018. And when I was at BoucherCon, I met my agent, Josh Gessler. He wasn't my agent at the time, but he heard me speak on a panel, and we had this really fun interaction. Because you ever been on a panel where at the end of the discussion, somebody stands up and they say, well, I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment. And it's like, here we go. Buckle up. And so at the end of this, and we were talking, it was a panel about Southern crime fiction. It was me, Ace Atkins, Stephanie Post, Alex Segura, and Eric Pruitt was the moderator, who's also a great writer. And at the end of we had talked about race and poverty and all those things and how they impact Southern fiction and Southern crime fiction specifically. And this lady gets up, and I've told the story dozens of times, but she gets up and basically she's like, I know the antebellum South was hard for some people, but I miss that time period. I miss the manners and the tone of that. And so Eric looks at me, he's like, would you like to comment on that, Shawn? I was like, I would love to comment on that. So I got a little snarky with her, and I said, look, I know you miss it. I said, look, I know sometimes you feel like maybe white people are being pushed to a minority, so I'm going to help you with that. Me and you going to work through this together. And everybody kind of laughed. And so after the panel, Josh Gessler, he walked up to me. He said, "Hey, I really like the way you handled yourself on the panel, the way you talked about, the South and about your narrative and story influences." And he said, he gave me my card. He said, "If you ever, write anything that you think I'd be interested in, look me up." And I had just finished the rough draft of Blacktop Wasteland. So when I got home, after some hemming and hawing, because like I said, I had an experience with an agent that didn't work out so well, I finally sent him the manuscript, the rough draft of Blacktop Wasteland in November of 2018. He signed me to represent me in December of 2018. And he sold it to Flatiron Books with an option for another book in February of 2019. So that's the long story to the overnight success, I guess.
Want to grow as a writer and take your writing to the next level? Give Pro Writing Aid a try. Pro Writing Aid is a grammar checker, style editor, and writing mentor in one package. Pro Writing Aid will never replace a human editor. Rather, it helps you self-edit to a deeper level so that when you send it off to an editor, they will be able to focus on the meat of your writing and not spend their time fixing basic writing issues. Pro Writing Aid is the only platform that offers world-class grammar and style checking combined with more in-depth reports to help you strengthen your writing. Our unique combination of suggestions, articles, videos, and quizzes makes writing fun and interactive. Writing can be grammatically perfect but still feel awkward and clumsy. Pro Writing Aid searches out elements like repetitiveness, vague wording, sentence length variation, over-dependence on adverbs, passive voice, overcomplicated sentence structures, and so much more. Nothing makes a writer lose credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Submit clean, error-free writing. Go to ProWritingAid.com and use code HANK20 for 20% off of Pro Writing Aid Premium. Pro Writing Aid. Check it out today. Yeah, there's always that story, Shawn. When we see a new writer pop up and this guy just got lucky yesterday. No, there's years and years. That luck comes with a price usually.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of Ace Adkins, it was on that panel with you. He was on the show yesterday, and what a great guy he is.
Mm-hmm.
Shawn, what is it that makes Southern literature stand out? It's very rare that you see a book that's labeled, well, this is Midwestern literature or this is Northeastern literature. There are definitely things about those regions that make them stand out. And I think if we scratch our heads long enough, we can come up with, The Grapes of Wrath maybe is a great example of Midwestern literature, or Stephen King, maybe Northeastern. I don't know. But there's something that separates Southern literature. There's something very particular, very special about the kinds of stories that when you read it, this is a different place. This is in some ways a magical place, and but also in some ways this is a tortured place, and there's history here, and all of those things put together combined to make this gumbo that is Southern life is a particular interesting place, but Southern literature is a reflection of that. What is it to you that makes Southern literature stand out? And maybe the things that make us uncomfortable when we read it, maybe the things that make us proud. But what do you think it is about those that makes these kind of stories stand out?
I think Southern literature stands out because it's the tipping point of history. It's the intersection of the great American conflict of race and poverty and class. And I think Southern fiction is uniquely attuned to those ideas in a way that other regions of the country just don't experience. I said it online the other day. I was talking about it to somebody recently. I said, being in the South and being a son of the South, being raised in the South, it takes an incredible amount of strength and perseverance, especially to be a person of color in the South, but to live in the South, because there are certain ghosts that live here. and that we're all forced to deal with. And we're haunted by those ghosts. We're haunted by the specter of slavery. We're haunted by the specter of poverty. We're haunted by the derelict hierarchy of plantation life. The stinging rebukes of upper society and lower society. And so I think the South, we have been forced to struggle with those ideas in a way other parts of the country haven't. We've been forced to confront those ideas. I mean, you look at somebody like Flannery O'Connor, all right, and you look at a story like Revelations, and even in that story where that character is seeing people ascend to heaven, she's seeing them ascend on separate elevators, so to speak. And that character is an example of maybe the grotesqueness of the South. You look at a writer like Ernest J. Gaines, and the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, or A Lesson Before Dying, and you see the incomparable will that it takes to be a person of color in the South. Or you look at a book like anything by William Faulkner or William Gay, Provinces of Night, and the torturous and implacable pain of poverty. And I think all those things make Southern fiction unique. I mean, like you said, there are great Midwestern and even Western and Southern California fiction. You look at a great book like The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock, and that's a book that tackles similar themes. But again, because we live, in I live in a town where every time I drive past the courthouse, I have to drive past 4 or 5 Confederate flags and the statue of a Confederate soldier. And so we are forced to confront those issues again and again. And in my opinion, all great narrative and all great fiction comes from conflict. And when you're forced to deal with those things over and over again, I think it produces incredibly rich and layered stories. You spoke about Ace Atkins. Ace Atkins is one of the writers, I don't think he gets enough credit because I think some people see him as a genre writer. But when you read the Quinn Colson series, he's talking about all of that, the specter of racism, the specter of slavery, the inability of some people in the South to rise above their current standing, whether through their own inability or through, ideas that people press upon them. And he does it in a very interesting, very incredibly exciting way. But I think that's an example of the uniqueness of Southern fiction.
Well, and I think you said it perfectly. People look at Ace and think, well, he's just a genre writer. Well, my God, what other kind of writer would you want to be?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you're a literary writer and you sold 5 books. Congratulations. I would much rather be someone that people cared about and, bought thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. So what,
exactly.
Label me, it's the same struggle that's been going on forever. It's just a different look to it now.
Oh yeah.
So Blacktop Wasteland, you told us this great story about how you found your agent and that you had been working on this book. Before all of that, before there was an agent to send it to, before anybody cared about this book, when this story first came to you, what's that first kernel of a story that started this whole thing?
I don't think I've ever said this before, but I've been thinking about it the last few days. And I think because, okay, so Blacktop Wasteland, the character of Bug, I wrote about him in a short story called Slant 6, which was published in the last issue of Thug Lit called Last Rites. And it got some attention. It was like a distinguished, it didn't get in the Best American Mystery Short Stories 2016, but it was one of those distinguished stories. But even before that, I think the genesis of the story was a conversation I had with my dad. And like I said, me and my dad were estranged when I was younger. Him and my mom split, as a lot of families do. And I think when I was younger, I had a very black and white viewpoint about that. And as I got older and made my own copious amounts of mistakes in affairs of the heart, I learned that there are no black and white stories when it comes to family history. There's always shades of gray. Right. And so I had a conversation with my dad one day, and this is when I was really I was excited because I got my second story published, and he lives, it's funny. My mom lives on one end of the county and my dad lives on the other end of the county, and I'm in the middle. So, which is very much like my life was growing up. And so I went by to just, he's older so now, so I go by and check on him, make sure he's okay. I went by to check on him, and we got to talking about the story that I got published. And he's not a huge reader. My mom was a reader. But anyway, at one point he looked at me and he said, I'm so proud of the man that you become, even though if I had nothing to do with it. And it just, something about that stuck with me. And we had never had that conversation. You know what I'm saying? And I'm saying conversation, air quotes, that conversation, the conversation. We just had kind of had a mutual agreement to not talk about it as we got older, and we were able to repair our relationship somewhat. We had never had the conversation. And so we had it that day, we had it that day. And it was like, I just saw this incredible amount of pain in him. And I had always thought that he didn't care, not that he didn't care about me, but that he didn't care about what I had gone through growing up without him, or not really without him, because like I said, he's only 7 miles away, but this disconnect. And hearing him talk about events that had happened in my childhood from his perspective, from his point of view, there was a birthday party that I even a better one. I wanted to go fishing. He had told me he was going to pick me up to go fishing. He never showed up. And, a lot of kids have that story. But to hear from his point of view that, him and my mom had a disagreement on the phone the night before, and he felt kind of nervous about coming by. He didn't want to cause a big ruckus. And so it made me think about fathers and sons and how we communicate with each other, or how we don't communicate with each other. And Blacktop Wasteland started there. I think it started about a man who, he didn't, his father was missing completely. He had lost contact with his father. His father disappeared. And how would that affect him? And how would you excise that ghost? And what would it take to, relieve yourself of that demon? I think that's where the actual genesis of the story came from.
Noveler is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Noveler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Noveler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing, from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Noveler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by Pro Writing Aid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Noveler for a whole year, and it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Noveler, Novlr. That's noveler.org. Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community. that the fathers and sons, that is some fertile soil right there
Yeah, yeah,
that you could pull stories out of from now until Jesus comes back.
yeah, yeah.
There's so much there. But the character of Bug, Beauregard, and I love that you nickname him Bug. I have a suit of armor that we got from a yard sale or something. It sits on our back porch, and I call him Beauregard, and it's kind of a tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
too. But I love this character. How did he start forming for you?
I think he came about because I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to examine those issues about fathers and sons, and about tragic masculinity and the sins of the past, the sins of the father visited upon the son. And I wanted a character that was strong enough to deal with that, to carry that. And I wanted a story. I wanted a character that could bear the weight of that story. And so he kind of started forming that way. I remember I had an idea when I first started the story, and it wasn't the first line in the book, but it was a line of dialogue. And it just popped. I don't want to say it popped in my head. I was thinking about starting the story, and I was thinking about, how would I start it and where would it come from? And the line was, that son of a bitch sure can drive. And that started me thinking about what person would engender that response, or who would be described in that way. And that's where he started coming about. I tell you the truth, I named him Beauregard sort of as a little a little poke at some of the I would say Confederate apologists in the world. And I really wanted to, I really believe very strongly that there are people who believe that the South belongs to Confederate apologists and neo-Confederates and people of that ilk. And I am a firm believer that the South belongs to everyone. My family, we walk upon the ground that my ancestors bled upon. And so naming him Beauregard was definitely a little bon mot, if you will, to some of those folks. But as a character, his qualities started to kind of find themselves as I wrote the story. And I had an idea where I wanted the story to go, and I knew the kind of character I wanted. My first book, My Darkest Prayer, it's serious, but it's got a lot more humor and it's more pulpy, because that's what I was trying to write. I wanted to write a pulpy Raymond Chandler-esque story, Easy Rollins-esque story. But with Blacktop Wasteland, I was trying to be a little more serious. And so I made the character a much more serious, sort of tough character, and he ended up being much more multifaceted than I initially thought he would be.
Speaking of that name Beauregard and how that was that something that you use to kind of poke on that a little bit, if we can't do that as writers and come up with things where we can kind of poke people a little bit, make them think, make them feel something that might start a conversation. What good are we if we can't do that?
Exactly. And that's, I think, the point of being a writer. I think that's a part of the job, when you sign up for it, is to make people feel things and make people think a little bit. As my mom would say, a little bit of medicine, a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down.
That's right. That's right. Your mom's a wise woman. You were talking about, that you originally wanted to be a horror writer, and you kind of settled into crime fiction because you really had the skill set for that. And this is something that you were comfortable in and could tell these kinds of stories. Where do you color those lines between horror and crime fiction? Because there are some elements there are things about these genres that share the same space. One takes it a little further than others, but there's a lot of similarities there. Where do you draw the differences?
I have a friend who's a writer named Ed Kurtz, and he had this line. He said one time we were hanging out, he said, horror and crime are kissing cousins. And I firmly believe that. I think it's the same foundations and the same structures and infrastructures that create a good horror novel can create a good crime novel. You need suspense. You need strong characters that you care about. You need, sometimes you need, startling, brutal violence. And you need a satisfying conclusion. And I think, like you said, the lines between horror and crime blur quite a bit. Some people are better at it than others. I don't know if I'm as good at it to say, like, I think Joe Lansdale is an incredible writer when it comes to blurring all the lines, but especially the horror and the crime fiction lines.
Right.
I've mentioned Stephen King. He does it a lot. There are a lot of writers. I think the great writer Stephen Graham Jones does a great job with that, kind of creating these ideas of people pressed against the wall, just like crime fiction, and then you throw a werewolf or a horror novel trope in there. But I think there's definitely a lot of as you would say, as sometimes we say down here, in Virginia, they're in the same church, just different pews.
Right. I love that analogy. One thing that I think I know about you, Shawn, from reading Blacktop Wasteland is you love a good conflict. And there's no story if someone is not in trouble or they're not having to make hard decisions or there's some quandary that comes up, and that's where stories come from, isn't it? Where people are in conflict.
Oh yeah.
So the character of Bug is a good guy. He's someone that any of us would want to be friends with. He's someone that you would want on your side. But Bug, of course, comes up against some conflict. And what did you devise for him that kind of sets his story in motion?
This poor guy. Oh my gosh. I just piled. I'm a firm. I just kept piling stuff on him. Pressure. I quoted my mom earlier. I'll quote my dad now. Pressure either turns you into a diamond or it grounds you to dust. And so I kept piling pressure on Bug. He has an auto garage that that's going under because a new shop opened up in town, and he's got a mom who's she's terminally ill, but she's in a nursing home and she might get kicked out because of a clerical error. And he's got a daughter from a previous relationship. He's got 2 sons with his current wife. And, his wife, she doesn't want anything extravagant. She just wants a house that's got a foundation that's not on wheels one day. And so he's got kids, his sons need glasses and braces. And, one of his sons, is troubled like he was. And his daughter wants to go to college. And there's a whole conflict there with her mother and how they're not, on the same page, not on good terms. And so I thought, if you keep piling this pressure on this character, then that will create a good story, because I firmly believe we are at our most honest when we're under the most pressure. And so I'm consumed with the idea of identity. And it's a big theme in the book. Is Beauregard, who is he? Is he Beauregard or is he Bug? Is he Beauregard, the business owner and the husband and the father and the son, the loving son? Or is he Bug, the wheelman, the gangster, the outlaw? Or is he a combination of them both? And so by piling this pressure on him, he's revealed who he really is by the end of the book. And I think that the best stories are the ones that just keep pushing and pushing and pushing the main characters until they snap. And sometimes them snapping is not them giving up. Sometimes them snapping is rolling up their sleeves. Sometimes them snapping is like a very quiet man finally balling his hands up into fist. And so I think that's what I tried to do with Bug in the book.
I love that. Shawn, let's talk craft for just a minute. Do you reside in the camp of the pantsers or the plotters? And I love that you're laughing, because this is one of those writer questions where people have arguments back and forth about who's right. Do you know where the story's going from the beginning, or are you chasing the story to the end?
I am kind of a hybrid. I'm too, to be perfectly honest, I'm too lazy to outline, but I'm too afraid to not to give myself an idea where I'm going. So what I do personally is I'll write a 2 or 3 page long synopsis of the story. when I get an idea if I get an idea where it's like, I really want to explore this. So I'll write a 2 or 3 page synopsis. And a lot of times it's very stream of consciousness. It's just me writing down what I think is going to happen. And then once I get to the end of that, it gives me a roadmap to the book. I don't have to follow that synopsis. And in fact, a lot of times the final book is very different than the initial synopsis. But for me personally, I have to see the end or a possible ending before I begin. And then once I can see that ending, I can take different routes to get there. Or maybe I don't get to that particular ending in itself. I may go a different way, but I have to see the story as a whole before I start in on it. And again, like I said, it's just a roadmap, it's guide. I don't actually have to follow it to the letter, but I am not somebody that can just sit in front of the blank screen and start typing. I think mainly because I'll go off on different tangents. I have to have some cohesiveness for the story. And so, yeah, I'm a synopsiser. So I guess that's the middle ground between pants and plotter.
I love that. And what I've found in asking lots and lots of people that question is that most people kind of live in the middle somewhere. You know, there are people that plant their flag in one or the other, but most people are in the middle there somewhere. Do you find that as you start writing that the characters take over the story sometimes and it goes in a different direction than you first thought?
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time. Like, you know, there was a version of Blacktop Wasteland that was very different from the final book that you have in your hands now. And I think that was because I had certain ideas about what was going to happen to certain characters. And they decided, no, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to go this way. And we're not going to end up we're not going to behave. And so, but I think that's when you really, you know, I think sometimes for me, writing is like, it's like plugging into a conduit. You know, you're getting this message or this current from an unknown source. And when you really are jamming on a book, it's almost like you're not even doing the writing. It's like you're just reporting a story that somebody told you, you know, over a couple of years. And that's when I think the writing is the best. And I think that's when the characters really come alive, is when they don't go the way you thought they were going to do, you know. And so, you know, it's like when it's like trying to herd ducks. It's like, no, come over here, get back over here. And so I think that's when the story is really coming alive for me personally. It's like, you know, like I said, the way Blacktop Wasteland ends now is definitely not the way it ended in the first draft, or even when I came up with the idea. And so I think any writer that will tell you that, yeah, there are characters that certainly come to life or start talking in a certain way, and you want to know, well, what happened to you, or what's your backstory, or where are you going? And like I said, I think that's when you really are feeling, you know, for lack of a better word, the magic of the story.
Shawn, do you have something that you're working on now? Because if we know publishing the way we think we do, then this book has been off of your desk for quite a while it goes through edits and all the publishing. You know, what have you been doing with yourself in the meantime? There's got to be another story that's taken up root in your brain.
It's funny because I started my first book, My Darkest Prayer, in this fall of 17, and I wrote it and into the spring of 18. And then I started Blacktop Wasteland in the summer of 18, and I finished that book fairly quickly. And so with everything going on with Blacktop Wasteland, when it was in the editing phase, I had already started another book. So I just got it back a few weeks ago from the editors at Flatiron, and I'm in revisions now. Basically, this is a story. It's a revenge story about two fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons, whose sons were murdered. Their sons were gay, and they were married, and they're murdered in what appears to be a hate crime. And so these two, you know, tough as nails, alpha male guys decide to investigate this crime to get revenge for their boys, but also it's them subconsciously trying to redeem themselves, because both of them separately, when their sons came out, when their sons were open and honest about their sexuality and their identity, neither one of these characters accepted it, and in fact they were hostile to them, and so it drove a wedge between them individually with their children. And so they are trying to seek revenge and make things right for their sons, but they're also trying to redeem themselves and hopefully become better people by the end of it. And that book is tentatively titled Razor Blade Tears, and I'm knee deep in the middle of revisions for it now.
that's one of the craziest premises I've ever heard in my life, and I love it. I cannot wait to see that book and when it comes out. That's amazing.
And that takes place in the South too. That takes place in Virginia, and it's very much the same world as Blacktop Wasteland. In fact, there's some characters that might make a cameo from Blacktop Wasteland in this book. So it's definitely a book of the South, and I was inspired to write it because I have a cousin who came out recently, and he's in his 40s, and there were members of the family that didn't go well. They didn't accept it, and it just bugged me. It really did. No pun intended. It bothered me, and so I really wanted to talk about acceptance and talk about prejudice in rural areas. I mean, we all hear about the red states and the Bible Belt and how those that certain ideas and beliefs exist there, and they do. But I think that there is a possibility for change. I think there's a possibility for people to better themselves and educate themselves when it comes to issues like that. And I wanted to write about characters who were on one end of the spectrum, and through their grief and through their vengeance, hopefully, possibly, will learn and grow and end up on the other end of the spectrum.
Well, if there's one thing that we've learned since George Floyd was tragically murdered, over a month ago, is that these issues are blowing up all over the country. But in the South, these things are kind of top of mind all the time. These are not things that just blow up and erupt like we've seen in Michigan or wherever. These are things that we struggle with out in the open all the time.
And I think I definitely think that's what makes the South unique. It's like I had a friend of mine ask me, and they were like, what do you think about, you talk about race a lot in your books, and you're talking about, homophobia in the next book. And they said, why do you think that's pertinent now? I said, I started Razor Blade Tears 6 months ago, before Mr. Floyd's death. I started, Blacktop Wasteland a couple years ago. I mean, those issues are always at the forefront in the South, and we're confronting them. I think, we confront them head on in a way that a lot of people don't. And I think that's why you see this great movement sweeping across the country. But here in the South, we've been forced to, yes, I think there's a reckoning happening in the South now, as along with the rest of the country. But I think you're seeing the South lead the way in that reckoning because we've been dealing with it so long.
Well, and you see that most of the bigger protests are going on in places that have been quiet for so long. And in the South, you don't see quite as much of that because we are confronting these things every day. This is not something new for us.
Yeah, I think so. I think we talk about it. We're forced to deal with it in a way that other places aren't. And, we haven't always dealt with it well, but we are talking about it. I think that we are dealing with it. I think it's no mistake that you see, a lot of statues in Virginia being pulled down because, I can speak only for myself and maybe members of my family, people that I know. But, those are things that we have been seething about for years, and we've been vocal about for years, and we've talked about it for years, and not all that, our local officials weren't always receptive, and so I think that's why you see the outpouring of emotion now, so I think those issues are cyclical in the South. And, I say this all the time. I love where I'm from. The South can be beautiful and it can be grotesque. And I think as a writer, it's our duty to represent both sides of that coin, the beauty and the splendor and the monstrousness and the grotesqueness, because they are what make this part of the country a whole.
Right. You're absolutely right. And you don't get to have the beauty without dealing with some of the grotesqueness of it as well. They walk hand in hand, for better or worse.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. The new book is called Blacktop Wasteland. This is a magnificent book. Shawn, I love it so much. I'm recommending it to everyone. This is a must-have for your summer reading list, and a page-turning read. You have done a masterful job of, when you fall in on the first page, you don't get to climb out until the end. This is an amazing work. Shawn, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, is there a place where they can find you online and connect with you?
The best place to find me until I get off my lazy butt and make a website is is probably follow me on Twitter. You can just search when you search S.A. Cosby, it'll bring up my Twitter. It's at Black Lion King 73, or you can go on Facebook on my Facebook page, S.A. Cosby Author. There's a lot of information there, and I'm more reserved on S.A. Cosby Author on Facebook. On Twitter, you may get some wild midnight ramblings and some weird observations that are unique to writers that are up at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to work on a plot point. But yeah, I love hearing from folks, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed the book. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Shawn, we're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of Blacktop Wasteland. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
World Anvil is a browser-based world-building platform designed for all world builders, writers and novelists, dungeon masters, game developers, and everyone else. World Anvil keeps your world settings safe and organized, helps you find your characters, locations, plots, timelines, and maps quickly and easily as you write. Then, if you choose, you can showcase your amazing world building to the world, beautifully and interactively, to keep your readers engaged. You can even use our professional tier to build your career selling access to behind-the-scenes content your readers will love and growing your community. Build your world setting in any genre with over 25 custom-built world-building templates, complete with prompts to inspire your creativity. Allow your readers to explore the public parts of your world in an innovative new way with interactive maps, timelines, and wiki-style articles. Give special access to co-authors, beta readers, customers, or patrons to see exclusive behind-the-scenes content. There's a free version to get started with all of the major features. Guild membership offers you a host of extra options, including comprehensive privacy settings, co-authors, presentation options, and so much more. Join our community of over 250,000 world builders, including professional authors. Take part in competitions and learn more about world building at this fantastic online community. Use the coupon code HANK to get 20% off all 6 and 12-month subscriptions. WorldAnvil.com. I'm a recent convert, and I know you will be too.